Okay, my name is Xing Wu. I'm the director of the Institute for Public Policy at HK UST, and today's event is actually jointly hosted by the Institute for Public Policy and the Institute of Environment at the HK UST. Before we begin, I also like to thank Dr. Christine Low, who's not here today, and she helped to put together this event. We are greatly honored by the presence of Mayor Eric Garcetti for today's distinguished lectures on very important topic. For those of you who are not familiar with the Institute for Public Policy, we started about 2 years ago. We focus on interdisciplinary policy research on key policy issues in Hong Kong and the Greater China area. Aside from policy research, we also focus on providing executive training program on important topics such as aging and innovations and sustainabilities. Right? So today's event actually is one of the key events that we have, and also part of our the distinguished lecture series here. So welcome all of you. I would like to now invite the acting president of HK UST, Professor Wei Shi, to give his opening remarks.
Good morning. Mayor Garcetti, I think today, to me, the #1 challenge was to make sure I pronounce correctly. But we were all relieved as Americans, we don't care how we pronounce, so it's okay. But it is for those friends and colleagues from Hong Kong, I think thank you for coming as early birds. For our visitor from LA, I know it's a cocktail time, so we make sure everybody will sit against the window so you don't see the nice view. We get everybody undivided attention because we have a very interesting and important topic to come up. Okay, we all know that Hong Kong and Los Angeles share many similarities as important ports, and with several universities, and in fact, universities between Hong Kong and LA collaborate very extensively. Our university, being very young, when we first started, we received substantial direct assistance from UCLA at the time, for business school in particular. Okay, and we have a joint degree program with USC. We have faculty exchange program with Caltech. Okay, we do not have a basketball team, but it's okay. Okay, but we do have a very nice skyline. So with that, I'd just like to welcome again, I think, Mayor and all the guests from LA, and we look forward to a very fruitful exchange. This is not our main campus, in case you do not know. Okay, we have a slightly larger campus, which actually is very beautiful because of the distance. So we decided to hold it here because the mayor needs to go to see our chief executive soon after this. But we hope we will have a chance before long to invite you all back to our campus so we can have a little bit more relaxing and further exchange. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Shi. Now I'd like to introduce today's moderator for the event, Mr. Victor Mallet. He's a journalist and a commentator and author with 3 decades of experience in Asia, Europe, and the Middle East and Africa. He's currently Asia news editor for Financial Times. So actually, we just discovered we share interest in the study of Ganges rivers in India here. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And it's really a great pleasure to introduce Eric Garcetti, the mayor of one of the world's great cities. It's also no secret that he may seek to run for president of the US in 2020. In fact, there's an interview in today's Financial Times by my colleague Ben Bland, And he didn't talk much about the presidential issue, but he did talk about how LA is very much open for business with China, despite the incipient trade war that we've all heard about between the US and the rest of the world that's been launched by the Trump administration. And as you heard from Professor Wei Shi, LA, of course, like Hong Kong, is, it's not just a place where they make movies, it's an incredibly important port. In fact, I learned in this article that 40% of America's seaborne trade comes through LA or nearby Long Beach. And Mayor Garcetti has been very busy developing infrastructure and dealing with a whole bunch of environmental issues, including the increasingly important one of climate change. In fact, my partner Michelle Weldon, who's somewhere in the audience and there works for Civic Exchange, she was telling me last night that Hong Kong's rules to stop the ships just over there from emitting very noxious fumes from dirty fuel. Now that fuel is restricted, and essentially Hong Kong followed the model that was set in California. So this is one of the ways in which Hong Kong and LA and California can work together. So we really welcome Mayor Garcetti, and we hope that the vision that he is going to lay out before you today can, again inspire Hong Kong to do better in improving its urban environment and make this, truly Asia's world city. So Mayor Garcetti, thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Victor, and thank you all for an early morning gathering here. It is a joy to be with you, and thank you, President Xi, for hosting today and the entire university for so warmly welcoming us. And I'm not just talking about the weather, I mean warmly welcoming us in terms of the folks that are here. And I just want to briefly ask the delegates that are still left on our, I think I counted 59 meetings in 8 days trip through Japan, Korea, Vietnam, and now best for last Hong Kong, just to stand for a moment so I can thank them for, and you can see how many folks are here from Los Angeles. Thank you all for coming and being a part of making history. And I do get the good view. Nobody's keeping away from me. So if my eye line is slightly above you, it's because I'm soaking in one of my favorite cities, a place that I've been coming to since my parents brought me here first as a teenager. It's interesting, I sometimes have gaps of time between coming to Hong Kong, but I've come at least once every decade since. And there's an expression that the years tell us things that the days cannot see. And when you have that distance, sometimes we can see as outsiders even better than folks who live in a city what has happened, its evolution, its growth, its maturation. And Hong Kong is one of my top 3 or 4 favorite cities in the world. And coming here very much feels like coming home. And part of that is that it's always reminded me of Los Angeles. Its topography, its geography at a strategic point, its diversity. And Los Angeles and Hong Kong are both cities literally at a global crossroads and figuratively at a global crossroads. Municipalities where the hills meet the sea, places where a diversity of ideas and relationships can begin and grow. And places where people come from all over the world to innovate, to be part of new ideas and reimagining not just their municipalities, but nations around them and the entire world. And at night, whether you're standing atop Victoria Peak or whether you're above the Hollywood sign, both of our cities lay out like a bed of jewels at night. They're among the most stunning places to live. If you're lucky enough to have been born in one of them or smart enough to have moved to one of them, you know what I'm talking about. And walking the streets here, I'm reminded that our food scenes are unrivaled, drawing people closer together, getting to our hearts through our stomachs, whether it's over a bowl of beef soup at Kao Ki just a few blocks away from here, or huddled around a food truck in Koreatown eating a Korean short rib taco. We are always looking for a better place to eat. And we share the Pacific. We have an ocean that lies between us, but it does not divide us, it unites us. And as I've been saying throughout this trip, while American foreign policy makers a few years ago said it's time to pivot to Asia, in Los Angeles we did not need to pivot. We've been looking at Asia. We've been linked to Asia since the beginning of our history. In fact, the pobladores, or in Spanish, the settlers who came to Los Angeles, were a group of diverse individuals who traced their ancestry back to the Americas, back to Europe, back to Africa, and to Asia. 2 of them were classified by the Spaniards at the time as Chino, Chinese. So our diversity is not something new, nor is Hong Kong's. It's been the seed that was planted and that has flourished in both of our cities. In fact, if you combine the GDP of this metropolitan area and our metropolitan area, it's responsible for about 2% of the world's GDP. So we are real powerhouses, creative capitals with amazing art scenes, common language of cinema, whether it's Fallen Angels or Sunset Boulevard, movies that capture the imagination for generations. But I think there's something else that defines us, and something else that unites us. And I believe it is our appreciation for the role that cities are playing now. Cities are the original unit of politics. Think about Greek times, when the city-state first emerged. There were empires that have come and gone, but cities have always stayed. And while in many ways national borders are the accidents of history, of warfare, of colonialism, a city is an organic entity. People decide to either stay or to come to a city and to grow into it because they can. And this, at this moment, is the age of cities. A moment when cities are the most important political, economic, cultural actors on the world stage. And a time where cities lead as steady sources of possibility and of promise, of inclusion and innovation, and of building and belonging. Residents of Hong Kong and Los Angeles understand that fundamental role, that vital role of cities in the broad landscape of human history. We aren't just walled municipalities. We're vehicles of so much more, of innovation, even of foreign policy, I would offer. The original heart of global governance, commerce, diplomacy. I had to hire an ambassador to be our deputy mayor of international affairs because we have such a book of business with international relations. When we have the Australian foreign minister or the Canadian prime minister come through Los Angeles, they want to sit down and meet with the city. Not only because of the choppy waters internationally at the national level, but because we have huge populations of their countries inside our own city. Justin Trudeau, when he was in Los Angeles, said that there are more Canadians in Los Angeles than any city outside of Canada. When I meet with the Mexican president, it's because Los Angeles is the second biggest city of people of Mexican descent after Mexico City, and then you go back to Mexico for number 3. And history is incomplete without the story of cities, whether it's Athens and Sparta, Lagan and Bangkok, Hong Kong and Shanghai. Today, cities are increasingly where we design, where we dream up and drive the innovations of the future. And by their definition, cities are concentrations of humanity. It's what makes them so exciting, right? You can almost see the entire world in Hong Kong or the entire world on the streets of Los Angeles. And at their worst, though, we concentrate our challenges, our poverty, our pestilence, our pollution. So it makes sense for us to be problem solvers together, to have that link that Victor mentioned, where we can copy the best practices from one another, learn and see, find ideas, because cities are where problems live and breathe and where solutions are found as well. At our best, cities concentrate breakthroughs, buildings, businesses, places where we can achieve the next cancer cure, build the rocket that will take us to Mars, transform the technologies that will help our communities and our commutes. And cities are unafraid. We are bold. We don't have a lot of hierarchy usually. We're willing to engage in new relationships, and we're willing to kind of test things. The best platform in the world for innovation is a city. But the leadership of cities at this moment, the moral leadership of cities, has also been never more important. Right now we are living not only through the age of cities, but through an age of acceleration. Writers are talking about how things are changing so quickly, they are surpassing the ability of human beings to adapt to that change. For instance, last year's mobile phone is already obsolete. We're waiting for the iPhone 15 and the Galaxy 20, and we can get a warm bowl of beef noodle soup delivered to us in a matter of minutes. We're always adjusting to the changing nature of work. But this age of acceleration has given us two competing feelings. It's the excitement, first of all, that comes from rapid innovation. There has never been a more exciting time to live in cities, to see that change, to feel it, to be a part of it. Stunning breakthroughs in technology, remarkable leaps forward in our abilities to communicate, to interact, to travel, build, even to live. A child today who is born here in Hong Kong or in Los Angeles is expected to live more than 100 years. That's exciting, but it's also a challenge. So the second feeling is the feeling with that excitement of anxiety. The anxiety that accompanies these tectonic shifts in the ways that we live and work. The revolution that has primarily been two-dimensional, how we FaceTime with each other or one-click order things, is now entering the three-dimensional space as well, how we move, how we live. And it leads us to question right now whether our jobs, our homes, our communities will look and feel the same in the future, even our very earth, whether it can sustain human life. So this mix of excitement and anxiety I call anxitement. It is the feeling that you have of the bustling economy, but the bumper-to-bumper traffic and polluted air. The way that we have beautiful new skyscrapers, but right next door, families struggling to find a home where they can raise their children and afford the rent. In cities, we see the promise and the peril of this age of cities and of acceleration, and we feel anxitement every single day. But cities are accountable. Those of us in city government hear the questions on people's minds and know exactly what they're talking about. We have to balance interests. We have to build coalitions. We can't be ideological. We can believe deeply in values, and cities are informed by universally held values, human values of tolerance, acceptance, innovation, belonging. But we also can't afford to exclude people, exclude their ideas, exclude their contributions, and who we are. We're not traveling far away as elected representatives of cities to national capitals. We're being found at the grocery store, at the restaurant. Trust me, people talk to me wherever I am, whatever I'm doing. The neighborhood park, when I'm dropping my daughter off at school. And folks are asking pressing questions, burning questions in their lives. Will I be able to find an affordable and decent place to live? Will I have to stay indoors because it's too hot outside, or because the smog is too thick? Will I be out of a job in a few years? This exciting technology, will it actually replace my work? And we don't have to look too far to see both sides of this age of cities and of acceleration. Just walk across the street and you'll see some of the fastest elevators in the world here in Hong Kong at the International Commerce Center, moving 9 meters per second as they rise to the 118th floor. But across the bay in Kowloon, beneath the old approach path to Kai Tak, you have people who climb 5, 6, 7 flights of stairs to make it to their door. It's a fitting metaphor, and a story we could tell in Los Angeles too, where we have the tallest building west of the Mississippi, and a block away, people living in tents on the sidewalk. You see, the effects of our progress are uneven, and our greatest challenge, whether it's academia, government, or business, is to challenge this excitement and this progress, and to make sure that it works for all of us, and not just a few. You see, too many people feel left behind and left out. And we see this, we feel this first in our cities. We see the incredible wealth that has been created by an interconnected global economy. Los Angeles and Hong Kong are winner cities. But increasingly, if you're not one of those winner cities, even cities themselves are being left behind. In America, it used to be that the supply chain linked smaller and medium-sized cities to the large cities, where they would make the components of manufacturing that would then be assembled in the larger cities. But now it's actually the great global cities that are linked and leaving behind many of those medium-sized cities in our own countries. Hong Kong and Los Angeles are more tightly connected in some ways than Los Angeles and other American cities. It's cities that feel the impact of trade wars on our ports. These are not abstract things for us. These are jobs for dock workers who need to feed their families, as fewer containers pass through and quality middle-class jobs go with them. So these aren't statistics, these are stories. These are people that we know. Leaders in cities don't see poverty as some sort of numbers on a spreadsheet. We confront it, and we do the work of engaging with somebody living on the street to try to find them a home and a way back. We don't fear trade, we embrace it. We don't wall off our cities or they will fail. And even as others argue about what constitutes fair trade, which is a fair conversation to have, we are here looking for new deals for businesses. So even if there are choppy waters, the momentum of connecting more firms from America and Los Angeles here in Hong Kong and Asia means that we can weather that storm and build the long-lasting connections that will get us through this moment. Engaging abroad delivers jobs at homes. Look, I'll be honest, you always get criticism when you travel. That's something that I'm used to. Where people say, oh, we're off on trade junkets, we're relaxing. And if you ask any of these folks, I don't remember much relaxing on this trip. I think I had a half hour to myself on the plane and I had to reintroduce myself to myself the other day. but we know how effective these trips are. Because it's one thing to be introduced over email or on the phone. It's another thing to see someone, to understand them, to feel them, and to feel where they are coming from, and to understand their rapidly expanding ideas of the future. In Vietnam, when we sit down and link our clean tech incubator, the #1 in the world, with a high-tech park in Saigon and Ho Chi Minh City, we see the promise of being able to improve the environmental health of both of our cities together. When we're in Korea and we see a great entertainment company in Korea link and invest with one in Los Angeles, when CGV makes an investment in something called 2-Bit Circus, we are proud of a global export culturally that we can take from Los Angeles throughout Asia. When we are here in Hong Kong and we check in with our customers, our clients at the Port of Los Angeles and work on those issues like reducing the amount of pollution that our citizens breathe, we know that these trips matter. And that brings me to my third and final point, that cities must multiply our strength and results by working together. If this is the age of cities, if this is the age of acceleration, it demands that we create an age of collaboration. And if we're honest, there certainly are some headwinds in doing that ahead. But let me give you one example of why. We talked about air quality, but did you know that in Los Angeles we experience at least 1 extra day of dangerous smog because of pollution that's emitted from Chinese factories? That Pacific Ocean might seem big, but that pollution comes all the way over. And it cuts both ways, because right now, when we have these historic fires that are blazing in California, that pollution shows up in neighboring states and makes its way across the Pacific to you as well. So when we confront climate change, you have a stake in how well we do that, so that we don't have a historic drought that leads to historic fires that then leads to the air quality being degraded right here where you live. From an increase in the strength and frequency of typhoons to warmer winters and brush fires, extreme weather events, we have to stop calling them extreme because they are so common now. They're expected. And climate change is a global problem that requires global solutions enacted by cities around the world. We can build all the walls we want, but pollutants don't respect borders. And that's why Hong Kong and Los Angeles are leaders in C40, the global mega cities group, which I vice chair, which is a group that is addressing climate change and committed to finding solutions. I serve alongside your Secretary of the Environment, K.S. Wong, who I'll be meeting with after meeting with the Chief Executive this morning. And as we measure, and as we make commitments and implement plans that repair our environment and reduce our emissions, we make our cities more livable. We do have a foreign policy in Los Angeles. We're pro-environment, committed to saving this planet and sustaining human life. When our White House said that it was going to withdraw from the Paris Climate Accords, they said, if he's out, we're in. But we didn't stop there. We picked up the phone and called other cities around the United States, and to date it's 405 cities that have pledged, representing nearly 80 million Americans in 47 of the 50 states who have said, we're in too. In fact, cities is where the action is at. So how do we have this age of collaboration? We're also, besides being pro-environment, we're pro-engagement in Los Angeles, with the world across borders, because we know we're stronger when we work with the world, which is why I bid for, and we won, our 3rd Olympic Games and our 1st Paralympic Games. And I invite you in 2028 to come to what is now the 3rd largest economy of any city in the world after Tokyo and New York, to a place that is the crossroads of the world, the northern capital of Latin America, the eastern capital of the Pacific Rim, and the western capital of the United States, to see and to feel that engagement. In fact, it was funny when I was pitching the world, because there's 101 folks from around the world who vote on the Olympics. It was the longest political campaign with the fewest number of voters, with the most intense politics I've ever dealt with, but we won. But they asked us after our president was elected, does America want to be engaged with the world anymore? Does it want to be part of this world? And I said, well, it's a good question. We've bid twice for the Olympic Games. New York came and failed. Chicago came and failed. And I said, you're watching an America that's pretty darn good at turning into itself. Nations can do that quite easily. And we see that not just in the United States, but other places around the world. But if the Olympics comes to Los Angeles, I'll see for sure what I saw when I was 13 years old and those Olympics came in 1984. When the whole world was on the streets of Los Angeles, when they came and celebrated alongside us. and opened us up to the world to show us that our strength is when we are connected with each other. And they voted for us and came. So in 10 years, we have this fixed point on the horizon to say, how do we want to engage and who do we want to be? It's like having, important guests come to your home and you want to clean everything up and make it look pretty. Los Angeles is investing an historic amount in infrastructure, $150 billion in 15 new rail lines and rapid transit lines, an airport which we are fundamentally rebuilding from the ground up, our port which we're investing a couple $2 billion in and more, because we want to show America that we can stand up and make those investments, that we can solve real problems, not imaginary ones, that we are more about results than about rhetoric, and that we want to have the global engagement that demands. As some leaders clench fists, as they point fingers, as they pound tables, here in cities we extend our hands to each other. We look to how we can work with one another because we have to. Whether it's climate change or cybersecurity, the shared challenges that we face are just that. They are shared. We love our nations. We defend our interests and our borders. We understand that with cooperation comes peace and prosperity. So when Angelenos come to Hong Kong, when Hong Kongers come to Los Angeles, when countries reach out and engage with the world, when our students and our citizens travel to each other's shores or follow each other through social media, we come to understand each other. We appreciate each other's customs and traditions. We seek and find common ground and realize how we share this moment of excitement. The American writer Mark Twain once wrote that travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness. His words hold renewed meaning today. I wish more of our leaders would travel more, listen more, collaborate more. Because even as tweets and trade wars threaten to pull us apart, the world has never been closer together. This is the paradox of this age of acceleration. We're on this speeding train together. And we live in a noisy time. Today can be so loud it can be difficult to hear tomorrow. Some people speak so loudly and say so little, but in cities, we don't say a lot, but we do so much. In our cities, we can hear each other, and I believe we can see the future, a future that is defined by belonging and inclusion, compassion and prosperity, all of which are driven forward by the innovation that we see in a city like Hong Kong and a city like LA. You see, we can either be guided by the future, we can be passive bystanders along for the ride, or we can actively guide it. When I became mayor, I watched that, and some leaders were kind of sitting there future phobic, trying to keep it at bay. That doesn't work. Technology is here. Innovation comes. People grow, have families, have needs. You can be future passive too, either excited or disappointed about it, but passive. But neither of those are ways to move forward. We have to be future guiding instead of future phobic or future passive. Cities are uniquely placed to do that through our universities, through our cultural diversity, and through our industry. By our definition, cities are constantly seeking a better life for citizens. In Greek, the same word for politics has the same root as the word for city, polis. People came to the city to engage in politics. In my country, at a moment when politics is such a dirty word, let us renew what the political means, that we engage with each other, that we demand a responsibility of listening, of compromising, of building coalitions, and coming together to move forward, to house our families, to educate our people, to trade our goods, to share our knowledge, to clean our air, and to always lead by example. We don't just stand for progress without meaning. We're not just huge economic engines. Think about the most precious moments for each one of you in a city. It isn't that day when you make that deal, as exciting as that is. For me, it wasn't even that day I got elected mayor. It's that moment with my daughter in the park. It's knowing that I'll see her tonight. She's flying here to Hong Kong, and she just lost her first tooth. And I haven't seen her smile with a gap in her teeth. It's falling in love at a concert or a music recital with the person who you spend your life with. Cities are places where we realize what human living is about. The connections between human beings, not the separation. And where we realize in a time, at least in my country, where there's such a premium on the politics of division and subtraction, where people define themselves on what they can take away from folks and how they can point out divisions, cities are all about addition and multiplication, what we can give one another and the power of us working together. Aristotle once talked about that cities were all about finding and defining the good life, what that means for each one of us. So let us defend the idea that relationships matter between citizens, between cities, that diplomacy is essential, that we don't have to ever choose between defending the strength of a nation and collaborating or standing for values in this world. Here in Hong Kong, which has been a paragon of an open market, of open discourse, and of open borders, we too need to look at what we can do to emulate that and learn from one another. I come from a great American city that if you haven't visited, you need to come to soon. But it's also a great Pacific city and a great world city. One that looks across the Pacific here at the harbor in Hong Kong, an angel looking at this dragon, one that wants to see its wings soar back and forth across the Pacific to define this century together. And just as the hills meet the sea in both of our cities, so too must the present meet the future. And I'm confident that working together, I know we can meet and master that excitement, reduce the anxiety, and write a new hopeful chapter in the history of cities during this age of cities of acceleration and collaboration. Because in our cities, we don't just mark history, we make history. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for an inspiring speech.
Thank you.
Are you going to mic yourself
I'm
up?
going to mic
That's
myself
good.
up.
He's obviously had practice at this.
I wake up with one of these on me.
Good. So we've got about 20, 25 minutes for questions. We'll open the floor and we'll ask, if you could, before you ask a question, just say briefly who you are. It's great to see that we haven't got plastic bottles, which are the bane of Hong Kong here, because we're right in front of a Division of Environment Sustainability. So that's good. I've been at many conferences in Hong Kong where it's all about plastic bottles. I'm going to take the privilege of asking the first question, Eric, after your very inspiring speech. You talked about this being the age of cities. My colleague Gideon Rachman in the Financial Times, he had an interesting article the other day basically saying that the divisions in today's world are not really so much between countries, you know, between the US and China, but actually between cities and the rest. And you've got this sort of extraordinary situation where you have liberal urbanites in places like Hong Kong or LA or New York have very different views from rural America, small town America, or small town China or rural China. How are we going to get around those divisions? As you say, cities are these great sort of wonderful melting pots and so on, but how do you deal with that situation, which essentially got Donald Trump elected?
Well, look, unmute this.
Yeah, no worries.
So, testing. Can you hear me? Yep,
Yeah,
great.
that's good, thanks.
Thumbs up. So, that's a wonderful question, and it is the heart of the matter in many ways. I think I'd say two things. One is I believe those divisions are overstated, and that just comes from my travels. Everybody is linked with a local community where they live. And when I go to a place like South Bend, Indiana, it's the home of Notre Dame University, about 115,000 people, folks there want to see a vibrant Main Street with really interesting shops, with things made by local folks. You know, somebody said to me, it's not just in Beverly Hills or in Manhattan where we want to have a boutique. We want to have one here too. We just are struggling with how we could sustain one in a smaller town. We want to be a part of that excitement. We want to have cafes. We want to learn from each other. I think that there is much more common ground, but you're right in terms of where the economic activity is accelerating much more, which is in those winner cities that I was mentioning, the great global winning cities versus the ones that are being left behind. I think the best way to deal with that is to be able to figure out a model for urban revitalization that comes to those smaller towns. And I'm engaged with that. I started a new nonprofit called Accelerator for America. And we're going specifically into those kind of marquee cities and talking to them about what we can do with extraordinary leaders, mayors who are friends of mine, who are making those investments. In South Bend, just to stay with that, Mayor Pete Buttigieg is this amazing mayor. He's in his 30s. very dynamic. Studebaker, remember the old Studebaker cars when there was the big four in America? The Studebaker factory was there. And it's just lying there, vacant. But he's begun to fill it in with a high-tech park. Because it lies between Chicago and Detroit, it's very important for fiber, and they're laying down fiber. They're looking at ways, essentially, to catch up with this global economy and the needs of this tech moment. I was in a place in Iowa called Waterloo, where John Deere farm equipment is made. Still the best farm equipment in the world in this small town. And they have one of two centers to do very cutting-edge three-dimensional printing that is helping us have parts for our fighter jets and bombers, because you can't buy them off the shelf from the 1950s anymore. And this is in a very kind of rural area surrounded by farms. So I think we just have to not buy into the idea that these places don't have potential. And then finally, we have to also not stereotype each other. You know, I think people are much more tolerant and inclusive in those small towns and rural parts of America than people write about. And vice versa, we're pretty conservative in big cities about wanting good schools and family, you know, families that are together. I'm a conservative when it comes to families, which is why I don't want Donald Trump taking children out of the arms of their mothers when they come across the border. So I think it's a little bit overstated and overplayed, maybe.
Thanks, and we hope those 3D printers aren't used to make guns.
Yes, yes. No,
there's a bit of a controversy at the moment, isn't there?
Absolutely.
Right, so first question, gentlemen there. There are some mics coming to you, and just briefly introduce yourself, and thank you. Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, my name is Sing-Ming Shaw, former resident of Los Angeles. Is Los Angeles, indeed, the entire country will become more polluted under the new EPA currently run by lobbyists?
They won't help us, but no, they will, at worst, take away some of the national contributions as we continue to bring pollution down no matter what. In Los Angeles, we've reduced pollution by 90% since I was growing up. In our port, depending on which pollutant, by 95, 80, or 50% with SOx, NOx, and, sulfur oxide, nitrogen oxide, and particulate matters. We have our own government that is multi-city, multi-county, a regional government called South Coast Air Quality Management District. I've shared this model at a speech I gave at the University of Peking a couple of years ago when Beijing and other cities that are really choking on the same pollution we experience in Los Angeles were looking for solutions. Last time I was in Hong Kong, it was a very, very brown day when I was here, and I'm sure you still have some of those, even though they've been reduced. We have an EPA that will not be a partner as much now, but to my speech's main point, cities are the drivers of all of this stuff. Whether it was President Hillary Clinton or President Donald Trump, it still comes down to us to do all this work. Cities are in charge of building codes and how green buildings are built. We, in our case, own our own municipal utility, so we generate our own electricity, and we've pledged to stop making any electricity from coal by 2025, to be off of even natural gas and 100% renewable in a city that, thanks to Los Angeles Business Council, which is here with us, is the #1 solar city in America now. We are building 15 new light rail lines, as I mentioned. So the national government can't take that from us, no matter what, nor should they. But yes, it would be nice to have a partner that would add the additional 5, 10%. And what they're doing with the coal power plants, I think, would be very destructive to take away the rule that President Obama implemented.
Thank you. I mean, there's a lesson there for one country, two systems. You know, Hong Kong could actually take the initiative as a city to do things for its own environment that would be maybe ahead of what is happening elsewhere in China, although I don't know if that's the case at the moment. Yep, right at the back there, second row from the back.
Hi, Nicholas Gordon. So I hope I'm right in thinking that cities like Los Angeles and New York do not have offices overseas like Hong Kong does. But if a city like Los Angeles were to open kind of representative offices overseas, what areas of international affairs would you kind of carve out and put under their remit?
Right. Well, we do have presence in Asia and overseas through tourism and investment offices. I think we have 4 or 5 now in China. We have probably about a dozen of them around the world. Now, they're not diplomatic missions. We're not engaged in the work of political agreements, but I think it's not too far down the line when we will be. I'll give you one example of the kind of work we should be engaged in. When President Xi and President Obama made their historic agreement about being able to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions in both China and the United States, one of the planks of that said that cities in China and the United States will come together to talk about this. I was so excited, I called the White House. I said, all right, when is this happening? Where is it happening? How is it happening? They said, oh, we don't know. You know, presidents sign these things and then we figure them out afterwards. So I said, great, let Los Angeles take the lead and we'd love to host it. And working with our Chinese counterparts, the White House said yes to us. We raised the money, and within a year, Vice President Biden came. We had his counterpart here in China, counselor to the president, and we hosted a dozen mayors from the most important cities in China with a dozen mayors from the most important cities in America at the first US-China Climate Leaders Summit. Now that might sound like, oh, that's nice, you all got together. No, listen to what happened there. That's where Beijing and Guangzhou announced that they would cap their emissions in 2020 instead of 2030. It was the biggest agreement in the world before the Paris Climate Accords. And we had, I think, something like a dozen bilateral and trilateral agreements where cities signed things together. It's an interesting moment for international relations, right? The national governments, of course, take precedent, but we're not prohibited from signing some sort of binding or semi-binding agreements between each other. So I think the environment, smart cities, transportation, that's what I'll be speaking to the chief executive about, global health, you know, those are the main areas I think that cities should engage with. And of course, trade. We don't set the trade rules, but we can greatly expand the trade even as the rules are being kind of rethought, pulled apart, fought about, etc.
Yes, it's all from your right, my left so far, so maybe somebody over here should come up with a question. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Michael Gallagher. And how would you describe the health of democracy in the Los Angeles
In Hong Kong
area?
or Los Angeles?
Yes, yeah. Since you're visiting from Los Angeles, I thought I'd ask
In
about
LA.
Los Angeles.
Good.
Presumably it's very unhealthy at the national level for a variety of reasons, including 400 families or wealth interests dominating outcomes and purchasing outcomes. But I'm wondering if the picture is different at a more local level.
Well, democracy is alive and well and under attack, is how I describe it. You know, I think Americans are very resilient that when democracy itself is attacked, we respond. And I hope that more people are going to come out this year. At the local level, people are happier and people participate less. It's a funny thing that democracy participation usually goes up when people are more upset, and it goes down when people are happier. One thing that I do think is a long-term worrying trend is that for younger people, they're kind of confused about democracy, and we don't teach civics well. Democracy doesn't just come naturally to human beings. Argument does, freedom does, but engaging in democracy in an effective way has to be taught. In the same way we teach our children to like engage with their own conflict, you know, between two kids. How do you settle a dispute? I mean, these basic things. And instead of having adults who are teaching our children, we have you know, children who are leading our adults right now. And you know, a tantrum-based democracy is not a way to govern.
I love that phrase.
Press,
That's very
tantrums
nice.
against our people, and tantrums against the truth. I mean, what is worse than that? But I do see hopeful signs of, you know, I'll give you a couple examples. More women are involved in running this year than we've ever seen before, and becoming activists. Many of them, you know, my stripe, the political side of the spectrum, as Democrats, in places where, to your earlier point, we've written them off because we had this stupid thing that happened on television a few years ago where graphics allowed us to start painting and coloring in states as one color or another. So red ones don't get any attention, or red counties. So I was talking to Beto O'Rourke, who's running for Senate in Texas. He went to a town in Texas where he said nobody running for Senate, either Republican or Democrat, had visited since 1948 when Lyndon Johnson was running for Senate. Because it was red, so the Republicans wrote it off, it's safe. The Democrats wrote it off, why should I talk to anyone? And people were so happy to talk to someone. That, oh, you respect what I say, you want to hear from me? So I think that's what's missing, you know, the listening of democracy. I've never won an election by talking, I've only won them by listening. And I think we have to get back to that and teaching people how to best engage. So I'm optimistic this year for the outcome, but we have to have a 10 or 20-year plan of putting this in our schools and demanding it from our folks.
Thanks. Interesting what you're saying about participation. You know, my daughters complain about Brexit because they're British, and I said, you better make sure you register to vote,
Right,
you know,
right, absolutely.
because you can't complain if you don't vote. Somebody over here, come on, there must be somebody with a question. Yes, the lady there.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm Li Yao from China Daily. So you talked about cities working together with more collaboration.
Yes.
And here in China, in this part of the region, in recent years, we have been talking more and more about the Greater Bay Area involving Guangdong, Hong Kong, and Macau. I wonder whether you have been to Guangdong, any cities in this Bay Area other than Hong Kong. So what do you see the potential of this city cluster strategy? Because there are plenty of useful and successful experiences from American Bay Areas, including New York and San Francisco. And also specifically because you are sitting in front of banners about environment and sustainability. So what do you see this city cluster can help to address environmental issues?
Yeah.
And also I have another question about immigration, because both
I can only retain 3 things, so this is the
Right.
limit. This is the limit.
Okay, thank you. So I'm sure in the United States,
Yes.
immigration is a heated issue.
Yes, I've heard
Here
that.
also in Hong Kong, because it draws very opposing views and people have strong sentiments about it. And a lot of those sentiments is against the Chinese mainlanders. So what would you suggest the more rightful values people should hold about the potential immigrants? Okay,
Thank you. So basically, Bay Area corporations, how do they work and how should they work? And immigration, I think those are the two.
Environment and
Yeah.
and what cities I've been to. So last time I was here, I was in Guangzhou, our sister city. Los Angeles and Guangzhou are sister cities, and I went to Shenzhen too, because we have a lot of business with Shenzhen companies. BYD has its America's headquarters in Los Angeles. We're working with folks like Hazen Group and others on real estate projects that are in our downtown Los Angeles. So we're very closely linked throughout this region. And I was so excited to hear about the Greater Bay Area Council, is it, or Greater Bay Area Association that is forming. I do believe that cities lead, and cities are usually chopped up into smaller pieces than the actual city. So the city of Los Angeles is 4 million people. But I also wear another hat, because the county of Los Angeles is 10 million, so I do all the transportation policy for the county. I'm the biggest and kind of most prominent elected leader in an area that if you go beyond that one county, with no break, there's no rural area, it becomes 12 million with the counties that are right around it, and still no break, it's really 18 million people living in a single city together. So Los Angeles is 18 million people. When I talk about it being a $1 trillion economy, 3rd largest in the world, it is a region. And similarly here, now it's pretty continuous people in a region that the Greater Bay Area is what, 70 million or something? 60? So the key to, I think, cities doing well is putting down your territoriality, of figuring out a way to collaborate. It requires chief leaders, like people like myself, to not be too arrogant. You know, all those cities in Los Angeles always love to hate the mayor of LA because we're 40% of the population, but 95% of the headlines. So like, why are you getting all the attention in the newspaper? So I have a group that I convened the first month I became mayor to bring all 88 mayors of Los Angeles County together 4 times a year. They love it, they get heard, they get listened to, and then I can help lead in Washington, D.C. or our state capital, Sacramento. So I think that coming together is very important. On environmental issues, it's critically important as well. I mentioned our South Coast Air Quality Management District. That is a region-wide government. In Los Angeles, it's very confusing and occasionally effective, but mostly confusing. We have 30-something levels of government that are independent from each other. Our city government is different than our county government. Our county government is different than our school district. It's its own government with elected leaders. Our community college district is different. Our water quality district is different. Our air quality district is... If you have a mosquito problem, there's an independent government called Vector Control that takes care of mosquitoes and rats. I hear there was a rat outbreak here in Hong Kong earlier this year. So you know, we found that region-wide there are many problems that ignore borders, so you have to construct government around the problem, not the problem around government. And then the last question on immigration. Look, it is very important, I think, to maintain borders. No entity can exist without that. So I'm not an open border person. But when I was talking about open borders before, we need to have much more thoughtful immigration policies that focus on the economic needs, the family needs, the security needs, and the market needs, I think, of an area. In the United States, we have none of that. We have the most impractical immigration politics I have ever lived through in my life. Now, they're very effective politically. You know, President Trump gets people really scared that it's immigrants that are taking jobs away and that they're the problem of everything. But in Los Angeles, immigrants are our strength. 61% of our new businesses are started by immigrants. Elon Musk was an immigrant who may or may not have come through the country legally. His brother claims they were undocumented. He claims they had a visa. Who knows? But anyway, he might have overstayed the visa. But think about what we would have lost if Elon Musk had gone someplace else. So we need a pathway that takes people out of the shadows. I'm a very practical person about this, despite being also the grandson of immigrants from Mexico who was undocumented, I guess, back then, if that term existed, who volunteered for his country in World War II, got his citizenship as a result. I mean, imagine if he had been ripped out of his mother's arms the way President Trump was doing just a couple months ago when he crossed the border in Texas 100 years ago. I wouldn't be here giving this speech today. It would be Nina Bachigian, which would be great. You know, she'd be the mayor of Los Angeles. But
We're all
so
immigrants.
it's all our loss. So maybe
We're all
immigrants' loss. But and then last thing, just for here is, you know, I think, look, there's two competing interests in Hong Kong, if I can wade into, which is how much can this city sustain? It's definitely a place of economic opportunity. But if you don't plan a city, and immigration has to fit into that, migration, for housing, for the environment, you know, cities are on the brink of that excitement. The anxiety part is that they're almost out of control.
Thank you. We're pretty much out of time, but I can't let you go without asking about LA and the cult of the car. You know, is it ending? Is it changing? You know, we all know, you know, LA is essentially a low-rise city except for the center. How is this evolving? How will it evolve? I mean, here in Hong Kong, we have pressure groups that are trying to make pedestrianisation. Many people in Hong Kong, because it's a very dense city, unlike LA, you know, use public transport, and yet a lot of the city is still designed for cars, which is kind of bizarre, including stuff right here in front of you. You know, so is it finally changing in LA, or is it ever going to change fundamentally, or is it just going to become electric?
I think it'll change when the technology of cars change. It is changing some. It used to be when we turned 16, we wanted to get our driver's license. It was our rite of passage. Now I think for young people, your rite of passage is getting your cell phone, so you don't care if you have a car. Because that cell phone is the passage to freedom and getting Uber or Lyft to pick you up. And, you know, really turning 16 is about freedom. Now you get it in a different way. We are investing heavily in allowing people to have options outside of cars, but right now the car culture is alive, well, flourishing, and we're trying to improve conditions for cars at the same time. I do think we're on, when I talked about the three-dimensional revolution that's about to hit, what's been primarily two-dimensional, it's really in transportation. Our ambition is to make Los Angeles the transportation, technology, and innovation capital of the world. Because if I tell you what city in the world is that place, we don't have it yet. So between, you know, new ways of tunneling, Hyperloop, vertical takeoff and landing, electric drones that will carry people, which we're going to be one of the first 3 cities in the world to pilot, the way cargo moves, et cetera. We're on the brink of revolution, but the biggest one is going to be the interconnectivity of vehicles. At that point, it's not really cars the way we think of cars, because it's not human beings and our slow brains working. It is potentially the end of traffic deaths. It is capacity doubled or tripled on the road network overnight, because cars don't have to go like this, they can just go like this. In Los Angeles, 94% of the time cars don't move. And I don't mean they're stuck in traffic. They're parked, and only 6% of the time a car moves. That's highly inefficient. Downtown Los Angeles, 40% of it, the geography is for cars to be parked. That's not a good use of downtown real estate. 97% of fuel doesn't turn a car's wheels. It is wasted. That's inefficient. And even in peak traffic in Los Angeles, peak traffic, which is the worst in America, more than 90% of our streets don't have a car on it. So if you have technology that can better, Waze attempts to do that, but better use that, you could double, triple the capacity overnight through autonomy and interconnectivity. So I really think that's the revolution that's coming much more. It'll kill off individual car driving, and then car driving will become a hobby. It'll be more like a motorcycle that you kind of, hey, let's take it out for a drive up the Malibu coast and have a nice day.
Thank you so much. I think we've run out of time, have we? We have to, the mayor has to go and meet Chief Executive Carrie Lam, so I'm afraid we have to end it there. I've been told to be very strict, so if we can all give a big hand to Mayor Garcetti. Thank you.
Thank you. That's great.
Actually, I studied the PPP, which stands for public-private partnership here, and sometimes these partnership works, and sometimes these partnership fail miserable. I think today's, in today's lecture, actually, I learned new meaning of the acronym PPP, which stands for People, Partnership, and Prosperity. I think that to make the long-term prosperity, actually, we have to have a new form of partnership, but also have to bring people in. I think this is a very important lesson. Thank you very much. So let's put a round of applause for Mayor Garcetti and also our moderators, Mr. Barrett. Thank you very much for coming, and I look forward to seeing you in our next event.